This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So we're starting down the path of a new serial killer. This is an interesting one. There's pretty good evidence of a suspect in this case, and there are a lot of sketches that have appeared over the years. I wanted to talk about this one, although I don't think this killer is particularly unique. I do think this case is interesting. And that is the case of the I-70 killer, who is an unknown, unidentified American serial killer.
Right. And I feel like the distinction between the I-70 killer and the I-70 strangler should be made.
Yeah. Okay. So the I-70 strangler, which we've obviously covered, is a very different set of murders with what appear to be very different motivations.
I don't know about you, but I had a lot of trouble with this because to me, the I-70 killer or the I-70 serial killer and the I-70 strangler, it might as well say the same thing to me.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that. I have a little bit of trouble, and this is not the only time we're going to cover this year. I have a little trouble thinking of this person as just a straight up serial killer. So what I thought we'd do today is now, and I pulled a bunch of stuff from Bob Cypher. Bob Cypher has literally written a book on this particular series of events, of crimes. It's a murder spree, that's for sure. But I wanted to talk today about like what the I-70 killer is actually known for and sort of go over the, like, in my opinion, definitely linked 6 victims and whether you think they're linked and like how this all sort of shakes out. These are killings that all take place in the Midwest. We're going to start with cases that just seem to take place in Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. Now, it's interesting timing on all of this because there were other active killers during this time. But this guy has... So there's a later murder where there's like actual video. But in these particular instances, of which, even though there's 6 victims, it's 5 instances in Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas, where the sketches all look pretty similar, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Kind of. So the idea is that this is an unknown white male who killed 6 store clerks in this really short period of time. It's about 4 weeks in the spring of 1992. The nickname I-70 killer here makes a little more sense than the I-70 strangler.
I could at least follow it.
Yeah, his nickname comes from the fact that several of these stores where these victims were working were located pretty close to I-70. This pops up a lot of places. There's an Unsolved Mysteries that you can watch. America's Most Wanted had it. M. Phelps had it on Dark Minds. People Magazine Investigates actually covered it last year. The killer has yet to be identified. And even further, investigators have not publicly identified any suspects in this case. It's a strange one because there doesn't seem to be a real clear motive. It appears on the surface to be a robbery-based spree. But it's pointed out that the stores were usually only taken for real small amounts of cash. Now, is there any particular place you want to start here, or you just want me to jump in with the first alleged I-70 killing?
Yeah, let's just go chronologically.
Okay, so Bob Cipher, he writes for First Alert 4, which is out of Missouri. He has a great kickoff article. The title of the article is April 8th, 1992. The I-70 serial killer claims his first victim. Here's how Bob kicks this off. He says it all began in Indy. Wednesday afternoon, April 8th of 1992. Just 26 years old, Robin Fuldor was already the manager of the Payless shoe store. It was really no surprise to her friends, after all. She was the salutatorian of her high school class, just down the street at Lawrence Central. She had graduated a few years earlier from Indiana University. Her life was in front of her. The shoe store only had 2 full-time employees, and on this fateful day, her coworker called in sick. Robin knew that she would be running the store alone, and she headed out from her North Indianapolis apartment. Sometime around 1 p.m., a serial killer was about to embark on a month-long journey, one that would take him to 5 cities and leave 6 bodies behind. He was patrolling Pendleton Pike Road, a busy thoroughfare in Indianapolis. Captain Roger Spurgeon of the Indianapolis Police Department said, "I think there would have been a variety of stores to choose from. It was just a matter of whatever our suspect was looking for." Now, police believe that the killer entered the Payless shoe store around 1:15 p.m. They took Robin back to a storage room, and they shot her twice in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. The killer then rummaged through the cash register, and he took its contents, which was less than $100. In less than 15 minutes, so by 1:30 p.m., leaving Robin dead, he leaves the store. For the next hour, Payless customers would come in and out of this store, and they wouldn't see anyone. Now, next to this Payless shoe store, there is a Speedway gas station that was really busy. And at about 3 p.m., Lucretia Gullett's shift at the Speedway was about to end. So she's getting off of work, and she gets a phone call from the district manager of the Payless store, who's not on site. And Lucretia says that he told her that he'd been calling the shoe store since roughly 2 o'clock, so almost an hour. No one's answering the phone. And he just wants to know, can you go over and look in Payless and just see what you see? It took her about 30 seconds to walk from the Speedway across the parking lot into the Payless. And her quote says that she walked to the door, she opened it up, she looked to the left, and she noticed that the cash register was open and that there was nobody in the store that she could see. So she calls the police, and she goes to the back of the store, and she passes a woman and child looking at shoes. And she tells them that it would probably be better if they leave because she believes there's something wrong. And then she stayed in the store by the front door waiting for the police to arrive. So as she's standing there, 2 police come and they make their way to the back of the store. She says she could see that the door that had been closed that police were looking into, that one officer looked down and he was startled by what he saw. So police found a couple of different witnesses in this area who thought they saw something. None of these leads ever pan out. Captain Spurgeon, he inherited the case over time, but he says that in spite of it being a very busy area and it being a very busy time of day, early on they had no leads in this case. And the quote that Bob pulls from him is, if you describe a suspect as somebody you really have a keen interest in because of some sort of evidentiary link or eyewitnesses, then no, there was nothing that ever stood out to them. So they didn't have one clear person that they were looking at and thinking, we that guy seems to be it, and we're going to build our case towards that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I feel like they approached it at this point in time. This is the very first case, and it's all they know about, right?
Yeah,
this is all
it
that's
is.
happened. and they approach it like a robbery.
Right.
I wondered why, except that I feel like that was the only way they could approach it.
Well, I think at that point it is just a robbery. It has a shooting involved.
I don't
But
think it was a robbery to begin with.
No, I'm just saying, like, in terms of like looking at it, it's sort of the love, money, revenge thing.
Right.
Like they picked money thinking that would be the reason, so that, you know, they had a path to go down.
Right, but the majority of the time, robbers, they don't kill the people they rob.
Right, and that's where it becomes interesting and sort of infuriating.
Right. Well, yeah, but if you think about the path that it takes, based on this young woman, more than likely did not. There was no signs of a struggle. She probably didn't put up a fight against the robbery, and essentially, from everything that we can see that's told was at the crime scene, he came in. The last purchase that was rung up on the computer was at 1:12 p.m.
Right.
And he essentially like marched her straight back to the back room and shot her. Right?
Yeah. And he's gone by 1:30 or so.
Right. And so that's weird. That's a weird thing to happen.
Well, I'll say this. Like, so watching media about this and listening to different news clips about this, 15 minutes or 18 minutes, depending on which timeline you pick there, because it's like you said, 1:12 there's activity, and then he comes in by 1:30. The presumption is that's the first time they place her as like the store is being empty and she's nowhere to be seen, is 1:30. So that may not sound like a lot of time, but if you're either the perpetrator here or the victim, that is a really long time. 18 minutes is a long time.
Right. But I mean, whatever occurred happened quickly and she didn't fight back. So, you know, it seems it seems really strange. A Payless shoe store in 1992. I don't see how that would have been a more attractive target for a just, what is it, like stick 'em up and grab type of robbery than the Speedway next door.
The only thing that might make it more attractive, in my opinion, is desolation. If there's less people in the shoe store and you're not looking to create a fuss, that's the way to do it.
Right, but it's still, you said that it took the employee from Speedway that was getting off work that came to see what was going on 30 seconds to walk over.
Right.
And so that's not very long, right? It's the exposure seems to be, I mean, they're not in the store, but there's people buzzing around everywhere, right?
Yeah. And so this kicks off an investigation, but that investigation is about to really quickly, because this is Wednesday, April the 8th. By Saturday, we're going to add more people to this mix. And we're going to go 700 miles away. So, the second part of this takes place on Saturday, and it's at La Bride de Elegance Bridal Shop in Wichita. There are two women working. Patricia Smith is 23 years old, and the store's owner is 32-year-old Patricia Nagers. The subterfuge here gets a little more interesting, in my opinion. I don't know what you thought about this one, but the idea is the killer probably thought there's only one woman in the store, and the women had stayed past the normal closing time for the bridal shop of 6 p.m. because a male customer wanted to come in and pick up a cummerbund. So these women, under ordinary circumstances, would not even be here. And that's the strange part of this. But the actual customer arrives, and he's there to pick up this cummerbund for a wedding. But sometime after 6 p.m., before the customer arrives, the women let the I-70 killer into the store thinking that it's this guy. And after the women get murdered, the actual customer shows up to pick up the cummerbund and apparently comes face to face with the I-70 killer. The customer noticed that the killer had a gun, and the killer asked the customer to come with him to the back of the store. The customer said no, and the killer told him to leave. So had the customer cooperated, I think we would have had 3 deaths here.
Does that make any sense at all?
No, it doesn't fit anything. But the customer was frightened, so he doesn't report the incident for an hour. Later on, he is able to describe the killer, and that's where we get that he's a white guy with red hair, or reddish brown hair, depending on what you read, who's armed with a fancy-looking pistol. He described it as a, quote, Uzi-style gun. But he also describes it as a skinny white guy. So that's where we get this guy is the first sketch, I believe, is how this goes.
Yeah,
So,
I don't feel like there was a one for Robin's case. I don't think anybody got a good enough look at anybody in particular.
Right, which brings me to like how this links. The way that this links is, first of all, the murders are the same fashion. They've been taken to the back and shot with a .22 caliber pistol. But almost immediately, police find out that the gun that had been used in the Indianapolis murder, in Robin's murder, was the same gun used in Wichita. Because they find this out sort of early on, they have an inkling that they have a serial killer or a spree killer on their hands. I think it's a little too long to be like directly a spree, but if it ended here, he's still got 3 victims. So they say 3 victims, same gun, same guy. Potentially this is a serial killer. And Captain Spurgeon's quote that Bob Cyphers pulls, he says, I'm sure it was stunning to the investigators to find out that there's this link between these 2 cases that are like over 700 miles apart from each other, yet they all happen within the same week, essentially. One in the middle of the week and one at the end of the week. I think that part is, you definitely, if you have the same gun,
Well, I have questions about that.
Go ahead.
It doesn't seem to be addressed anywhere, really. But, a lot of ballistics comparisons have come out as being more subjective than they originally were thought to be, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's not like, it's an important detail that, they were both 22 casings or whatever, and that somebody drew an inference of a match. It seems very definitive, and I always wonder, not like immediately, but once you're 32 years later, you have to wonder if what's the holdup? Why is this case not solved? And in the event that like it wasn't the same gun.
Yeah. So are you saying you think that this could be a completely different person and a completely different gun just doing the same style execution killing?
I'm saying that I feel like limiting it could be part of the reason why this case isn't solved.
Yeah. Well,
now, granted, I feel like, okay, so far on Wednesday, April 8th of 1992, we have a 26-year-old woman killed in a shoe store. Okay. And then on April the 11th, 1992, we have a 23-year-old and a 32-year-old woman killed at a bridal store.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're killed in a similar fashion that is weird because it's like this pseudo robbery situation, but not really, because these aren't the types of stores that you would target for a robbery. They don't typically have a ton of cash on hand, more like just money to make change with. Now, granted, it's possible that women were more likely to be working at these stores than men, maybe. There's a strange thing that happens in this case where you've got a customer that calls and says that like he had picked up his suit and forgot his cummerbund and he needed it. And they said, well, we're closing, but we'll stay and we'll get it to you. Right.
Yeah.
And so they are literally only there to give him his cummerbund.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's, 5 hours later as opposed to the first murder. Right.
Yeah.
Time of day wise. So then you have this weird back and forth that occurs with the killer who's in the store and the customer who had them stay late and is there to pick up his cummerbund. I bet he was very confused, would be my guess. But, he decided he didn't need his cummerbund that bad and left. And then eventually called 911. I've actually heard that 911 call. It baffles the mind to think about a guy coming in and successfully forcing two ladies that are working at the store into the back of the store and killing them, unsuccessfully trying to beckon a male customer into the back room and then just letting him go.
Yeah, it's weird. Now, so I pulled up a lot of different research on this, and I'm just going to kind of back up what you're saying. And if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying you wonder how the forensics would shake out today, right? Like if there were comparisons being done.
I'm not saying that I don't think it was done by the same gun. I'm saying like there's a difference between saying that they had similar marks and they were both 22s and then saying that it was for sure the same gun. That's it.
Yeah.
Those are two different statements. And what I've heard is that it was the same gun. And it's my just sort of layman's opinion that unless you've got that gun and you've done some pretty extensive ballistic testing on it, I don't feel like that's a statement that should be said like closed off without any additional option, right?
Yeah, you're worried that it might impede the rest of the investigation because you're seeing the differences. And I see them with you, like the differences in the time of day and the differences in the type of store and the differences in the two people.
How is it that two women couldn't have walked out like the customer did?
I don't know the answer to that unless you've got a situation where, he's threatening to shoot one of them and the other reacts in kind to
but
not
you see
leave
where
that
that's really weird, right?
I see where it's weird, but I've seen that happen in cases, even in historical cases, where for some reason, and I don't think we're covering any of them like in the immediate future, but for some reason you'll have 5 people in a store and they all die by one gunman. So I'm with you on the question, but I understand that like there's like historical basis to think that this has happened. Does that make sense?
No, I don't understand what you mean. There's 5 people in a store that all die by the same gunman.
Yeah. You've never heard of that before?
Well, yeah,
like
that's a logical thing. That is logical. But what I'm saying is like he didn't kill the guy that came in the store. He let him walk out.
Yeah, I don't. If you're talking about it from the killer's perspective, I have no idea why he did that. My gut says it's probably like I've already been surprised by one extra person being in this place. I thought there would be one person. I don't need a third person, and I'm running out of room. I'm running out of room in the back. I don't know.
I don't think it mattered to him that there were 2 women there.
Well, where I was headed with this is I pulled a series that was written about I-70 from Reddit. And it's written by a user who goes by the name Forest of Illusion. And the third part of their series has some questions about this murder as well. I don't know that they're going down the same path you are. And I think at the end of it, I tend to agree more with you, but I want to read some of what they wrote. This is just titled The Bridal Shop Murders, Murders of Patricia Magers and Patricia Smith by the I-70 Killer. And this is part 3 in their series, but they're trying to look at the bridal shop murders as if they weren't related to I-70 necessarily. Like, what would it look like then? They kind of get there. It's not great, but here's how it goes. If you've been following the series from the start, you know I undertook it to shine a light on the victims of the I-70 killer, who are so often forgot in favor of the mysterious killer himself. And this post is written about a year ago, so it's around the same time that like people started writing about I-70 and some of the other places. It was frustrating to find that when I started researching from this piece, I could find very little information about Patricia Smith. And I found a little bit more information, I think, but it is a very generic name and it is very difficult to do. Force of Illusion asks, and why? Patricia Smith was white, 23 years old, and recently married. By all accounts, she was a type of victim that news media loves to highlight. Oftentimes, serial killers fly under the radar by killing victims who are less likely to be highlighted by news media or the police. And then they list off people of color, sex workers, people without direct connection, spouse, family, who the conventional serial killer wisdom goes are, quote, less likely to be missed. And they put in a parenthetical here saying, although this wisdom is often false, frequently these people are loved and missed, but their loved ones are not taken seriously by media or law enforcement. That's sort of the end of their parenthetical on this. While I'm obviously opposed to this approach in true crime, its impact on cases must be taken into account. And yet, when looking for information on Patricia Smith, there's simply not much there. So why is this? The answer is surprisingly simple. Patricia Smith, having a quite common name, is simply not the most famous murder victim with the name Patricia Smith. Rather, a Patricia Smith who was murdered in Lakewood by the Hammer Killer, who was later determined to be a man named Alex Ewing, makes up the bulk of Google search results. Thus, you can find information on the Patricia Smith only in our case by searching her name alongside the term I-70 killer. So they had that comment there, and I was going to throw that out.
She actually went by Trish.
Yeah, you saw that in the documentary?
Yeah, her brother talks on, I believe it's
the Dark
People,
Minds?
I believe
is it the People Investigates?
And she was she wanted to be a pediatric nurse. And she had just gotten married, and she had an older brother. He was 4 years older than her. And she had a nephew who was a baby at the time. The nephew had been born this September before she died in April. And her brother said that she never put that child down. Like, basically, she just spoiled him. I didn't actually try to Google her, so I don't know how that would kind of play out there. But what I got out of this murder was like both of them were named Patricia.
Yeah.
I thought that was really weird. Now, one of them went by like Trish and one of them went by Trisha.
Yeah.
And I was like, that doesn't really help much. And then I started thinking like, well, was Patricia just a super popular name when they were born? But they were very different ages. So 23 and 32, I believe. Patricia
Smith is 23 and Patricia Magers is 32.
Patricia Magers was married. She and her husband owned the bridal shop. And it was Le Bride and Sir Knight. And Sir Knight was the tuxedo part of it. And her husband had actually almost come to work with her that day. But she had told him not to worry about it. I guess because it was probably like prom time, like you said.
That's what I was picturing, because April tends to be, well, there are a lot of more weddings that time, but prom time is what I think of. And picking up on a Saturday, my thinking was he either had a wedding to go to on Sunday or he was literally going to the prom Saturday night.
Well, and usually for tuxedo rentals, you only keep it like a couple of days, so it is like pretty quick turnover, right?
Yeah. So, okay, there's a slightly different version on this post of what happened. So the idea there is the Patricias are working at the bridal shop, which is La Bride. It's April 11th, and so the first thing here to point out is people had pointed out in this poster's previous series that Wichita is not along I-70, and that is true. It is several hours away from I-70. Wichita is actually just off I-35, so that is something they're putting here. Nonetheless, we know that individual as the I-70 killer striking here. So you'll notice that this and plenty of other differences in the usual modus operandi in this particular killing. So hang on to that. We're going to bring it up later. And then they say that the two Patricias had stayed late, arranging to meet a male customer after their regular closing hours, which we just talked about, for this cummerbund. Presumably, they believe that the I-70 killer was this customer, and then they let him in the front door. There's no struggle. And after that, the I-70 killer takes both women to the store's back room, and he shoots them both, execution style, in the back of the head. So then, more than likely, after the two women were already dead, which is a slight contradiction from what I've heard, the actual customer arrives at the store, doesn't see the women, but sees a 5'7" to 5'8" man with reddish hair and a stubbly reddish beard. The customer noticed that the killer had a, quote, Uzi-style gun on him, end of quote. The killer tried to use the gun to coax the customer into the back room where the Patricias presumably were already laying dead. The customer refused. The I-70 killer told him to get out. And this poster says presumably trying to cut his losses and get away himself. It's believed that had the customer consented to going to the back room, he would have been murdered. Unfortunately, the customer was so shell-shocked by the encounter, they didn't call police until an hour later, at which point the killer is long gone. Norman Smith, who is Patricia Smith's husband, this is the younger Patricia, had expected Patricia to return home around 6:15 since the shop closed at 6. And he remembers that, quote, I thought maybe she had a late customer, so I called the store and there was no answer. So that quote is like he calls in and it kind of gives us a little piece of timeline. So Norman assumes that, they're busy. He waits until 7 and he calls again. He gets no answer. And at that point, he knew something was wrong. Mark Magers, who is Patricia Magers' husband, had tried calling as well, but didn't get an answer. So police arrive at the scene because an hour after he had this encounter, the customer who was potentially a killer, flees the scene. He calls and tells the cops that something is going on. Now, when the cops arrive, Patricia Magers is dead, but Patricia Smith is unconscious. She does not get declared dead until they arrive at the hospital. So police speak with the husbands and they rule them out. They speak with the customer who had seen the killer, and they create a sketch based on his description. This customer's eyewitness account, according to this poster, is part of the composites we see with various eyewitness recollections today. He says it's a big part of that. I don't know how big a part of it is. I've seen multiple sketches of this guy. So the poster finishes this little section by saying these murders are linked to a serial killer within days, and that serial killer would eventually come to be known as the I-70 killer. Now, the poster runs a little far afield here, but I'm going to use what he wrote just to talk about it because the sources are pretty good. So for only the second and third murders in this spree, the murders at La Bride were a stark departure from the I-70 killer's MO in a number of ways. Starting with similarities, however, between these murders and other murders, as we do in fact know that these murders were the work of the I-70 killer. So I disagree with that because MO is not necessarily set by one crime. So killing Robin could have stark differences from this, but I'm going to read what's here. Just as in the murder of Robin, the killer coerces victims to the back room no struggle, probably said to them something like, if they just do what he says, they'll be okay. He may have used like a fake burglary angle to get the victims to fall in line. More than likely, he shows the gun and they probably comply, thinking they're going to, be robbed. So he then shoots them both in the back of the head, which lines up with other killings. That's not a super unique thing. People who don't want to look at people's faces when they're killing them shoot them in the back of the head. And keeping people looking away from you is thought to be good for identification purposes, but it's also thought to be good for control. Police concluded that these bullets are fired from the same .22 caliber semi-automatic firearm used in the other killings, and bullets contain traces of jeweler's rouge. All right. Have you read that part? Do you know about the jeweler's rouge?
Yeah, he's polishing them.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, what did you think of polishing the tips of the bullets?
I feel like his gun was a piece of crap. And he was concerned about the guns jamming, because I imagine that in the event that you're going to want to shoot people, you don't want a bullet to get stuck.
Yeah, so I think this guy had an old gun.
Yeah, they determined what kind of gun they think it is.
Yeah.
It's like a Weenie Meister.
But I'm with you. I think that the gun probably didn't work great. And generally speaking, I think that your conclusion is probably correct. He's just trying to, he's doing one of two things. He's either using the jeweler's rouge to keep the bullets moving smoothly, or he thought for some reason it would change the ballistics. And it did, made them more identifiable. But
it's an Irma work ET22.
okay.
It's a German.
Yeah, that's what I was picturing. I was going to ask if it was German.
Well, and polishing bullets is weird. It's really weird, and that is something I have no idea. Like, it could have been a common practice for all I know, right? I really have no idea. The other thing is, like, it was to my knowledge, it was like the same brand of ammunition. Like, was there something in the manufacturing process that used that?
I guess it could be, yeah. It could be somebody reloading bullets, and that's the last step.
Well, it would actually make more sense to me if a manufacturer was polishing them than it would be if, like, some random dude was polishing his bullet. I mean, cleaning your gun, sure, but, like, polishing your bullets with jewelry cleaner?
Yeah.
It's weird.
I don't know. It is weird. But different people with different levels of attachments to, like, their process with how they treat their guns and their ammunition do some strange things. I've seen, like, some really strange things, even of non-criminal type. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this post, and then I'm going to come back around to some of the other stuff going on here. So the killings took place between 6 and 6:15. That's based on the phone calls not being answered and the arrival of the customer. According to historical weather data for close by Kansas, sunset would not have been until 7:52 on April 11th. So this is, again, it's daylight. He takes some money from the cash register. The poster here ran into something I also ran into, which is I can't figure out if they took the full till or if they just pulled the big bills. There's no specific cash figures for the LeBride robbery, only that there was cash taken out of the register. So those things are becoming sort of like, those are all things these crimes have in common. But there's some things that are weird. This poster points it out. Bob Cyphers points it out over time. In all the other killings, there's only one victim, and here we have two. Police believe that I-70 killer believed that there was only one woman present. I don't know if that's, like, the thinking or not, but, like, could be. Both of these women fit his type of young women with long dark hair. I think that's complete bullshit. I think anytime. I think there can be like things that they're looking for, but like if you're getting into like this type of random crime having that specific a motive, it gets a little weird for me.
That is not anything that's occurring at all.
You don't
Like,
think it's getting weird? You think it's normal?
no, I'm saying like, well,
Oh,
for one thing,
you
Patricia
think?
Smith had blonde hair, so not really sure what they're talking about. As far as like thinking that they're picking out like who they're going to hit.
Well, this author of this post is not the only one who says this. Like this pops up like saying that he liked young petite brunette women, and I understand like people want to go that way and give something meaning. I don't see anything about that happening here.
Well, in fact, it's interesting. Like I said, Patricia Smith had blonde hair, and Patricia Magers, she was I think she was either at least as tall or taller than her husband. She was very tall. She was not petite in the least. When
Okay.
they met, she was the tallest woman in the room, which is what attracted her husband to her.
Okay.
And so, again, what I don't feel like whoever was in the store came into any sort of consideration except that they were female.
I tend to agree with that. It comes up here, so it's laid out as a commonality here. In my opinion, it doesn't really match up, and there's some other things that later don't match up because you have one of these victims is male. So the poster kind of wraps up this section by saying their guess is that the I-70 killer made his way to several different stores, perhaps along I-70, I-35, knocking on doors after closing, hoping people would let the killer in. He said, I think it's very unlikely there are many other women out there, perhaps some of them still alive today, I think it's very likely that there are some other women out there, perhaps some alive still today, who saw the I-70 killer knock at the door, chose not to let him in. They may or may not know just how lucky they were, just how likely they became, how close they likely came to becoming one of the victims. One might push back on this idea, suggesting that perhaps the I-70 killer visited the store earlier in the day, overheard that they were awaiting a customer, and decided to visit the store just after they closed, knowing that they would be likely to let him in since they were waiting for a customer. But this entails several huge risks on the part of the killer. And then he's throwing out, first, visiting the store later, the killer would risk the women recognize him when he came back later on. So if he visits the store and then comes back later, the killer could be recognized. And thus they would know that like he wasn't the customer. Go ahead.
Well, they're dead, so
Right.
What would it have mattered?
Well, they wouldn't have let him in. If he came during the day and then comes back at the end of the day, the LeBride folks wouldn't let him in because they would know that he was not the Cummerbund customer. And he says, secondly, the killer would be taking the assumption that they did not know the customer who was scheduled to stop by later, as if they knew him. Well, how would they know? How would the killer know there's a customer coming? That makes no sense.
None of that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they're talking about. It was a complete hit. If you want to believe that this was the I-70 killer, okay, you have to believe that this guy happened upon the store that was closed but not completely because they were waiting on someone and killed them in this like 15-minute period of time.
Yeah. So look, in my opinion, I don't think this is a situation where I don't think you can apply a lot of logic to this type of crime.
I'm mostly just curious with regard to why on earth they would refer to someone who let somebody leave as a serial killer like this.
Well, it's number of victims and semantics. Realistically, this guy is sort of a spree killer. Until we know
a spree killer. Then why would you let somebody leave?
He wasn't on the list for that night, or you're out of bullets. I don't know.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't make sense at all. And so we know that the gun is used in Robin's crime, or a similar gun is used in Robin's crime. It does bear hallmarks. Let me ask you this. Do you think it could be a copycat?
Not 3 days later, no.
Yeah, I think it's too quick to be that close a copycat.
I don't know what all was released. From what I could tell, I mean, I guess I know that by the time they found out that there was a potential link in the ballistics comparison, because they had reported to NCIC, and NCIC is the one who said, oh yeah, like 3 days earlier there was this other case, right? And by the time that had happened, like they were already out of leads on Robin's case, and they really jumped on that new lead that the ballistics were a potential match to the wedding shop, right? And so to me, I feel like the investigators would obviously know more about it than I do, just having kind of, went over what's available. But when you start running out of leads in a situation where you've got a young woman who was executed at her place of business, her job, for like no reason at all, you might get a little bit desperate in trying to make some sense out of it. And that's fine. It would be fine, except that like now we're 32 years later and it's still not solved. And I think a lot of times when you're that far out and it's still not solved, some of the parameters that have been set up in the case, they need to be looked at again and maybe moved around a little bit. Because if they rule certain things out based on one of these incidents when it could be completely applicable to one of the other incidents, I feel like they could be missing out on something.
Yeah, I think so too. This gets particularly weird with Michael McCown, he's the next victim. I think he goes by Mick. Now, some people have said like he had a long ponytail. That does not what the police report says. It's not what the poster on Reddit says. I found photos of him with long hair, but they appear to be like the photos that were brought up. You know how they get photos of victims from family. They look older. They look like they're from the late 70s to me. So I'm not sure that that's going to apply. But the Wikipedia says that Bob Cyphers briefly addresses this, and Forest Evolution talked about this a little bit. But here's the gist. After this double homicide, whoever this killer is waits 16 days. And now we're going to Terre Haute, Indiana. I don't know if you've looked at all this on a map before, but we started at Indianapolis, and then we went about 700 miles over to Wichita. Now we're going back to Indianapolis, and we're headed over to Terre Haute. So this is a male victim. Everything that I've read says that ballistics and the presence of Jeweler's Rouge is what links Michael, whom he may be known as Mick. M-I-C-K.
Yeah, it's Mick.
But linking him back to this is the Jeweler's Rouge and the ballistics. He's the only man killed during the spree. Investigators have chosen to theorize, kind of just like you said, I guess that would be a form of tunnel vision, that the killer chose the store because it's called Sylvia's Ceramics. That's where Mick is killed. Less than $50 is stolen out of the store, but he does take Mick's wallet, and we don't have any witnesses to this crime. If you read about this, there's some debate over like what Mick's hair was like at the time and whether or not him having a hair and earrings is what leads to him being shot. I don't know that this is accurate information we're being given.
The investigators don't know if his wallet was taken. His wallet was not on him.
Okay, gotcha. His
But
wallet
they don't.
was not
But
accounted for.
nobody ever like looked on his dresser to see if it was there, like at home. I'm just saying. To me, that shows kind of something fell apart pretty quick because. So in that case, having it be linked, right? If the guy was truly after females, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, sure, possibly he mistook him as a female, or he, because this was his family's shop. His mother owned Sylvia's. I
Yeah.
think his mother was Sylvia, but his sister worked there as well. It's entirely possible that the perpetrator assumed that, Sylvia's ceramic store would have a female working there. I don't know that they had seen, been by previously or whatever. If that was the case, it's very likely that he could have seen Mick's sister working. The way it's described that he was killed was someone entered the store and it appeared that he was like crouched down, perhaps looking at something or putting something or getting something off of a bottom shelf. And
Right.
he was shot and he basically crumpled right where he was. Okay. Mick, for all intents and purposes, would be in that invulnerable group of, potential victims because he was a young, healthy guy. But like I've said previously, that all changes when somebody has a gun and access, right? And so he wouldn't have been on guard, I don't imagine, at work. Because let's face it, who's going to go into a ceramic store and kill someone, right? That doesn't really
Right.
make a whole lot of sense. And so he may not have even looked up to see who had come in the store. And they may have said, hey, I'd like to get whatever. And when he went to get it, they killed him. Now, they didn't make him go in the back room.
No, they shoot him out front. That's what I was about to say. They kill him on what's essentially the showroom floor.
Right. And I'm not sure, so if this is really a thing, did he suddenly realize it was a guy? Did he have a flashback of the customer at the bridal shop not going in the back room? Did he, what changed up this guy's MO if it's the same guy, right? What made him, because he had to have caught him off guard, right? He had to have seen that because Mick wasn't, even if he had a ponytail and earrings or whatever else, he was tall. He was a big guy. And so, he didn't mistake him for a female for very long.
No, he would not have.
And so, if he said, hey, I'd like to get that thing on the bottom shelf, but the account of the eyewitness at the bridal store, there was no indication of anything about the perpetrator there that was scary except for the fact that he had a gun. Everything else about the guy didn't have anything to do with impending. To the extent that the customer just said no, I'm not going to go in the back room with you. I'm just going to leave. Right.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't afraid, which that kind of illustrates my point as far as, who's going to be taken. Well, that guy was no, not me. Right.
Yeah. And so I don't know what to think about Mick's case. As far as I can tell, there's no witnesses. I can't even figure out from what's being said, and I don't know if you've seen this in any media, because I realized I didn't have any way to verify this. I tried to find it on Reddit. I started going back through audio and video media. I can't tell how Mick was discovered.
Another customer came in and found them.
Okay. Well, I never find an account from that in what I'm reading.
In fact, a customer came in, and he was literally, you could see him through the display window.
That's what I thought might have happened. I don't know that
his family actually saw it on the news before they notified them.
Well, that's where I was headed with this. I was going to point out the fact that his sisters, one saw that something had happened on the news. I don't think they saw his body.
No. They saw that the reporter was standing in front of Sylvia's ceramics.
Right. So then they called and they spoke to the police on the scene.
So that was like one gigantic disaster. Now, so Mick, his murder happens on April 27th, and that is 16 days out from the bridal shop murder of the two Patricias on April the 11th. And 3 days before that was when this all began, from what we know, right? And that was Robin's murder at Payless. By the time that April 27th rolled around, I feel like they had already decided that like there was a maniac on the loose. And I felt my initial impression was there wasn't, I'm not saying anything bad about Mick. I'm just saying I never saw any sort of rudimentary process go down where they actually ruled out typical motives.
You mean because they make this like supposed comparison with the jeweler's ruse and the ballistics, and they just kind of go, maybe look, they link it before they rule out like this is not a serial killer? Is that what you mean?
I mean that I haven't seen any indication that they made sure that there wasn't some traditional motive for why he was killed.
Gotcha. I follow you. I haven't seen that either.
As opposed to, because I mean, I feel like the Patricias at the bridal shop, that was a little quick, right? Because there was no connection until a little bit after that happened. And so, but his murder takes place, like enough time has passed that they're connecting these dots. And you'll notice, like, for one thing, he's not a female. For another thing, he wasn't taken in the back room, but he was shot, pseudo execution style. He was shot in the back of the head. And so that was similar, right? But other than that, there's not really a whole lot that parallels it. But I do feel like it was immediately attributed to what ends up being the I-70 killer. I still feel like they should have gone through the motion of making sure there wasn't any other reason that this would happen. Now, they're in a ceramic store. There was no signs of struggle. There was money taken, I guess. But I feel like the money was, I don't feel like these were ever they were never going to be actual, like they're not robberies, like somebody going, I need to go get some money, and this is what they end up doing, right? Yeah. It's got to be rooted deeper. Now, okay, so far we've got Payless shoes, we've got the bridal and tuck shop, and now we've got a ceramic store. Are you seeing a trend here?
They're all related to weddings.
That's what I sort of got out of it.
Yeah, like this could be somebody who got jilted at the altar. Is that where you're headed?
Or something like that. And so, okay, and the reason I'm going that way is because it's not. These are not. Serial killers do not shoot people execution style over and over again. It's weird, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so because of that, I immediately have to start looking for other types of motives. And I'm thinking he is, doing that whole sort of, I know I say it's vicarious and it's not, it's something else, but he's getting revenge, like, through a different source, but it's personal to him, right?
How old do you think he is?
I think probably, I would say mid-20s, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking
maybe
too.
Maybe 30. He's not going to be too young, but he's not going to be too old either. I'm thinking mid-20s.
So, yeah, I'm thinking that as well. Now, I think, just staying on Mick for one more second, I think two of the things about Mick, while I agree with, I don't think they rule everything out, I think two of the things about Mick you have to look at is the reason he's not in the back room is because he wasn't female.
They didn't want to take the chance.
Yeah, like I think like seeing a guy from a distance and then seeing him up close, and I do believe he knew he was a man. I have a different thing in my head about that. But I think when if he came in, he either came in with the idea being to catch him looking down, or he came in and asked him to do something on a lower shelf because he knew he wasn't going to get the guy in the back room. So I'm putting that out there. That doesn't preclude me, like it being a difference. It's just this guy's able to respond, in my opinion. I'll tell you this. I think the guy's a convicted felon, one. And two, I think you're looking for either dad or grandpa to be infantry in the U.S. military. And I think it's more likely grandpa. So I say that because the weapon he's using, if all accounts are correct on what weapon it potentially is, even the three top weapons I've heard of, I'm betting it came from a veteran relative as, quote, an antique, even though it's technically not an antique. I think they would have considered it in their mind to be an antique. And I think that they're using that gun because it was freely available in their house, but also because it was likely brought back from a foreign place, which means there's no record of that gun. So that part, I think, is pretty clear. And I think he's either a felon or failed military. Take your pick on that. If he thinks that gun is an antique that hasn't been registered anywhere else, it was easy for him to get his hands on it, which means it's probably dad's. Or, I mean, he could have bought it at a yard sale or somewhere, but it's probably dad's or grandpa's. And so you'd probably find like a veteran in his close in his family as to why that particular weapon. I also say that because that's where those bullets would have come from. They didn't actually come from him, but dad or grandpa, probably grandpa, polished his ammunition and had a couple of boxes of ammo. So this guy's pulling from those boxes of ammo for these murders. But I agree with you on the wedding thing. I think the wedding thing and the origin of the gun are very important things to consider here.
Well, and we're not completely through the 1992 murders, but I've never seen it. And you know, the distance here is substantial. Like just from the first to the second, it's like 700 miles, right?
680 or 90, yeah. It's
And
700
so,
miles.
you know, so because of that, it makes it unlikely that there's going to be an actual connection, some sort of underlying connection. However, I find it hard to believe that there's not some sort of theme happening here.
Well, I mean, we're going 600 miles in the other direction for the next murder, if you want to talk about that. So we made it. Well, let me see. We went. Depends on where the starting point is, but Terre Haute is 600 miles from Wichita, and then if we go Terre Haute to St. Louis, that's not going to be 600 miles. That's 180 miles, maybe. So that's where we're going next, though, and we're back on a short timeline. We're now only going 6 days between the killings, and we're going to a boot store. I don't know if any of that like matters to you. I don't have a lot on this one. The write-up is okay on this on Reddit if people want to read it. It's in the same series, Under Force of Illusion. This is Nancy Kitzmiller. And on May the 3rd, so Mick McCowan or Michael McCowan took place on April 27th, 1992, around 4 p.m. Now we're going to a boot store it's called Boot Village in St. Charles, Missouri. And we're looking at May the 3rd. Around noon, a 24-year-old Nancy Kitzmiller opens up the shop, and she's found dead by customers at 2:30 p.m. She had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. She was supposed to be off that day, but she came in so her coworker could have the day off. And again, there's a little bit of money taken from the cash register. And we get another composite out of this. There was a witness who saw her with, quote, the final customer. But we don't have any additional information from that. If you go back and read Force of Illusion here, they have a little bit better line on things. They have some more information about Nancy. And here's how that goes. Nancy's parents have not given a lot of interviews on this case. From what they know, what this poster knows about Nancy, it comes from older interviews. Nancy was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Her family moved to St. Charles when she was 10. She loved Oklahoma. She hoped to move back. She attended Oklahoma State University and majored in geography. She loved maps, and she was hoping to make a career out of cartography. Apparently, shortly before the murder, Nancy had interviewed for a job with the Defense Mapping Agency there in St. Louis. She loved to play soccer. She played at Oklahoma State to some level, and she would always organize soccer matches in the community. Her style was something that people remembered her for. She was frequently seen in blue jeans, cowboy hats, and Western shirts. That's it. Like, there's not a lot about her here. We get this rundown that Boot Village is in a little strip mall that had a beauty salon and a vet's office. Nobody heard anything suspicious. And by all intents and purposes, no one saw a vehicle, which I found interesting in this in the area that this happened at. But basically, she gets called in to work, and it's allegedly the same gun. There's like some kind of match to it, according to authorities. I don't know what that means. So she wasn't led to a storeroom in the back of the store, but she was led to an office in the back of the store. And a customer who wanted to check out, just walked back there to see where she was and found her. This was, middle of the afternoon. So it's more similar to Robin's Payless murder. And we've got this whole, it's a boot store. I was going to say shoe store, but it's a boot store. And again, it's unsolved at this point. It's not really all that interesting. And I'm not saying that to say anything negative about Nancy. I just can't tell much from this particular crime. And we're relying on authorities to tell us that it's linked, right?
Right. And again, the link is with the gun or the ballistics on the ammunition that was left behind.
Yeah.
And every single thing I've read, it's very conclusive. And I don't think it was analyzed or reported to be that conclusive.
Well, Crime Stoppers says it might be related. You had sent me the Crime Stoppers, like the case info on her. Was there something else you wanted me to look at there, other than the fact that she has kind of blondish hair?
It's the date.
Am I getting it wrong?
Well, I don't know. I sent it to you because I don't know which date is right.
So I see May 3rd and May 13th.
No, that says April 13th.
Oh, April 13th.
I don't know what's right. I sent it so you could see. I feel like Nancy was after Michael, so that just seems like a pretty important thing to get wrong.
Okay, so what we're talking about right now is in our notes. We have a Major K Squad St. Louis Crime Stoppers report. And for some reason, it says that report number 207 is victim Nancy Christine Kitzmiller, location being St. Charles, Missouri. The St. Charles City Police Department requested the assistance of the Major K Squad in investigating the death of Nancy Kitzmiller, age 24. At approximately 2:30 p.m., police officers responded to Boot Village on Zumble Road for a report of a possible homicide of a sales clerk. There, they located employee Nancy Kitzmiller in the rear office of the business. She had been shot and was pronounced dead on the scene, except it classifies this as taking place on April 13th, 1992. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Have you pulled her obit? I have her dying Sunday, May 3rd on Find a Grave.
Well, I'm just saying, that's clearly somebody's mistake, right?
Yes, I do agree with that. Yes.
Okay, and these little things start kind of adding up because, if it's April 13th, that's a whole lot closer. For one thing, it's before Michael McCowan, but it also bridges, the 16-day difference between April 11th and April 27th. But I think that except for that one account, it
Most
looks
of
like
them say May 3rd.
I think so.
Well, there's something to think about there. Now, we have one more murder in 1992. Do you have time if we cover this now?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So after Nancy's murder, which is I would say is pretty heavily linked to the I-70 killer by, what do you think, forces unknown to us? Like, we don't see like something.
Well, she's another case where I didn't see them go through the motion of ruling out the traditional motives. I don't know that, May 3rd is going to be enough time from the initial. I don't know how much this was being like put out there in the media, right?
Yeah.
Like where if somebody had a grudge against Nancy, they could have made it look like it was part of this situation happening. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying I don't know if that would be a thing. And so because there's no information at all about her. And I do think her family probably, they haven't spoken out about it because it's probably really hard. But that leaves questions unanswered. And so I definitely think if they immediately linked Mick to it, that they would have linked Nancy as well. And I'm not saying that they're wrong to do that because I do feel like there's something to be said for this succession of store clerk murderings.
There's a number of things about this that make them similar. I don't know.
Right. And I can't figure out, like, were people who were working as store clerks, like, nervous? Like, is it that kind of story?
Well, where would you be nervous?
Going into work because
What city?
Well, anywhere along I-70 and perhaps I-35. You see what I'm saying there? Like, I don't know that that's the case, but my question is, like, was this so prevalent that it made people go like, wait, what? Or was it just another thing on the news, right? And I don't know how much attention it was grabbing at the time. I don't know, like, it seems to me like they were all sort of after the bridal shop murders, I feel like they were immediately attributed to one another, which cut down substantially on the initial investigation that was done, right?
Yeah, it gets to be the further you get away from Robin's murder, the less investigation is done beyond trying to compare the weapons.
Right, and I feel like that could be important, right?
Yeah, it is very important. Yeah.
Because, especially if you come across a situation where one of the victims had like a perfectly logical potential perpetrator.
I don't have anybody here, like, because this is one of those situations where if you're looking at it from this many jurisdictions, it could literally be anybody.
Well, but I'm saying just the regular old love, money, and revenge motives. Like, we don't know anything about Nancy, and it's really none of our business except that, 32 years later, her murder's still unsolved, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially since she's grouped together with all these other people. Now, my question is, did she owe anybody money? Did she have any conflicts with anybody that would cause them to want to take revenge on her? Was there any sort of love issue that could have led to someone having a logical motive to kill her? I don't hear any of that discussed throughout this, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, like, I hope they covered those angles, right? It's just with so little information out there, you would think they'd use it as filler because in other cases they do, right?
Yeah.
Even the other victims here, like people will say, this, that, or the other about it. And I haven't seen any information. And to me, it's not doing the victims any favors. But at the same time, we sort of instinctually trust that the investigators at the time took care of that, right? Like, oh, they would have certainly made sure that this was actually, going along with the pattern they're looking at for the I-77 serial killer, right?
Right. We do assume that, yeah.
Okay. And so I'm saying, well, what if that is wrong to assume it? Because as you read, there's not even any rumors or innuendo or anything with regard to like, oh, this is what was happening. She was involved in this or he was involved in that. And even if it's like made up and not relevant, there's always that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, right?
No, there's nothing here. Like, there's nothing that I have seen, even in local news. That could be the passage of time. It could be the quick association with it being the I-70 killer that like did that in, I guess.
Yeah, but I feel like that association should have been made like very last, because when you skip everything else, like the more victims you have that you're trying to get everything to line up with, the harder it's going to be to solve. And if you've got somebody in there that doesn't belong in that group, you just made it impossible.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I don't know where we would get. I don't know where we would get to trying to look at I guess the previous investigations. Is that what you're thinking? You're thinking like if we were able to look at the interviews and the steps taken. I hate to say it, like they didn't do their job, but maybe on particularly the last three, like maybe that would change how many.
Yeah, if they looked into like their aspects of their life that could have got them murdered through a traditional motive of love, money, or revenge, if all that was explored and there was nothing to be found. Now, granted, every once in a while you can come across somebody that they can't even make something up that would make it like a love, money, or revenge murder. But you can't come across like 4 different people that like none of them had anything that they were like, hey, maybe it's this person, right? Because the leads naturally develop. Okay, so with Michael, for example, and this isn't putting him down, but the investigators should have looked into every single person that he had dated recently, all the people that those people had gone on to date, any sort of conflict that was occurring. Okay. Did he owe money to anybody? Was there any reason anybody might have wanted to kill him for one of the traditional motives? Because it was completely hit or miss that he was working that day, right?
Correct.
Okay, but people that were in his life would have known that he had taken over running his parents' store, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what the dynamic would have been as far as like, maybe he was completely comfortable turning his back on a stranger. Maybe it didn't matter. I don't know enough about like the area and stuff to really make those kind of calls. But just like with Nancy's case, there's no indication she was married. There's no indication if she had children. There's no indication of anything about her life. And it's almost like they just immediately said, oh, she's a serial killer victim, right? And to me, like, there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to be explored before you get there. Maybe they did it.
Right.
But it seems like, it would come up somewhere, even if they didn't name people or whatever. It would, it would say that, like, oh, they couldn't find anything else. Instead, it just gets linked to this whole series.
Yeah, it does. And it's not over. We have one more death. May 7th, 1992. We have the final, quote, confirmed murder. The victim is working in a little gift store boutique called the Store of Many Colors. Her name is Sarah Blessing, and she's 37 years old. So during the day, she's in this little area where there's like an auction house, and there's a video store. And the owner of the video store sees a man go into Sarah Blessing's store, into the Store of Many Colors. The owner, a guy named Tim, who's done a lot of interviews for this, he hears a pop and he sees the man leave. And he runs in to check and see what had happened. And he discovers Sarah's body. And a clerk at a nearby grocery store, they saw who was believed to be the suspect, and he was climbing on a hill up towards I-70.
And those accounts contribute to the composite.
The names and the composite, yeah.
What?
The names and the composite. The I-70 killer comes out of that. They name him in May the I-70 killer. But this wasn't a strip mall, so it's a little different. This is not directly off of I-70. It's a couple miles south, but if you go up that hill, you would get onto Interstate 435, which would take you over where you could get onto I-70, I think.
I think that the point was like across, this like 800-mile span or whatever it ends up being, like you have to get on I-70 at some point to traverse to the next place. That's part of this case, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why they named it that. It could be completely irrelevant, but that's what they're calling them.
Yeah, so that's our victims from 1992. This is a series that we're going down. We're going to talk about some similar cases and specifically kind of get everybody's thoughts on these cases together. Do you have a lot to say in terms of if you think 1992 is the end of the spree for you personally? Like, in your opinion, is this it? Or do you believe what we're going to talk about in the next episode is linked to this or not?
I'm not really sure. Let's see. I'm not really sure if they linked it the same way, but I felt like more than likely that 1992 is self-contained.
Yeah, I think that might be the case as well. So these cases these murders that we just talked about, in my opinion, there are some similarities here. You've got a pattern where they're taking them into the back rooms, they're shooting them in the back of the head, potentially with the same weapon and the same ammunition.
And then you've got the shoe store, the bridal store, the ceramic store, the boot store, and then the gift store.
Yeah. It is odd, isn't it?
I feel like somebody that committed suicide about middle of May to the end of June might fit the bill here.
I'm not going to mention him right here as we end this episode, but I will say there's a missing person. If you look in time, there's a missing person that matches.
I think that there's something to be said for the choice of place.
Yes.
And that's really the only connection I could make, because these weren't robberies. Like, there was no there were better options for if whoever this was really wanted to go rob a place. And it had to, so if it's not, a robbery, And the shooting somebody in the back of the head is a pretty, well, I say personal, but also impersonal. It's really hard to explain. You're executing them, basically, right? It's a message that you could just be sending to yourself, even. But I see this playing out because of just the insanity involved in it. I see it playing out like him sort of ticking off a list or something like that. The other thing was between the bridal shop and then the ceramic shop, he may have really beat himself up about that customer that he let get away, and that might be why he killed a guy.
I thought about that too. Like and I thought about it from two perspectives. One could be, oh man, I killed those two women. Now I'm going to kill a dude. It could be the customer got away from me. So like, I am not a coward. I'm going to do this to prove to myself I can. There's a number of things that can happen there. But we're going to come back and talk about them again next week. Thank you so much for listening today. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
All right, so I'm going to tell you guys a few things about some of the folks who are helping sponsor our show. Now, Labrati Creations sponsors our show, and you can always use the Crime XS code there. You can also just message them at Labrati Creations, and they will generally do something for the people who come from True Crime XS. They were our very first sponsor. They've done a lot for the show, and that code is CrimeXS at LabratiCreations.com. The first new advertisers that we have, and I've selected all of these guys. I've selected all of these advertisers. So the very first one is Cure. Now, I'm going to tell you guys about this, about Cure as being one of our sponsors. If you're an athlete, you know that proper hydration is key to peak performance, but plain water can be boring and sports drinks can be filled with artificial ingredients and added sugars. That's why we love Cure. It's a clean and effective way to stay hydrated and perform at your best. I use it late in the day when I switch out of caffeine mode. Specifically, when I hit the pool or I go play tennis with my wife, I use Cure to help me stay hydrated. It helps me recover after a long day. Now, you guys may not know this, but I build things. Right now, I've been building several structures on our property out here. Among those is a new podcast studio space for myself. I do a lot of that work at night and into the wee hours, and I always have some Cure with me to go into my aluminum water bottle. Hydration is not just about filling up my aluminum bottle with water. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and rehydrate quickly. Whether I'm building things or putting the podcast together or chasing these dogs that you sometimes hear in my studio up and down the trails to get them worn out, Cure Hydration is the way that I choose to go. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution, or an ORS, that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and to rehydrate quickly. The formula is made with all natural ingredients like coconut water powder and pink Himalayan salt. It's free from artificial flavors, from sweeteners, and preservatives. Cure Hydration is vegan, gluten-free, and non-GMO, making it a great option for anyone with dietary restrictions or preferences. The packets are convenient and easy to use. You just mix them with your water and you drink. They're perfect for on the go. They're perfect for travel. And anytime you need a quick and effective hydration boost, ready to combat dehydration, then you try Cure today and feel the difference for yourself. You can use code TrueCrimeXS for 20% off your order. That's TrueCrimeXS I have a link that I'm putting in the most recent episode show notes, and True Crime Access will get you 20% off. Our second sponsor for the show today is Laird. Now, Laird has a list of things that they want me to tell you about. They have better ingredients with amazing taste and functional benefits. They have a superfood creamer crafted from the highest quality, all-natural, real food ingredients. All Laird products are sustainably sourced and thoroughly tested to ensure that you're incorporating the cleanest, finest fuel into your routine. They have all natural whole food ingredients, and they contain naturally occurring MCTs made from coconut oil. There's no artificial flavors, there's no colors or additives, and there's no sugar from highly refined corn syrup. They want me to talk about my love of coffee, but the truth is, I don't do much with coffee. But let me tell you someone who does. My wife has to have a cup of coffee every day. Now, I've fallen off recently, but one of the big things that I've done since the beginning of our relationship is she used to go and get a Starbucks every morning. I have substituted that out by always trying to make her coffee. It's not going to be every single day of time from when I met her, but for the most part, almost every day, I make her coffee. I put her creamers together, and I make sure that she has a good way to start her day. So with Laird, he started experimenting with his morning ritual almost 2 decades ago. He found that when he started adding fats to his morning cup, like coconut oil, he had amazing energy throughout the rest of his day. He gradually perfected this recipe for an epic cup of fuel, and he began sharing it with his friends in the surf community. I'm an ocean guy, so I saw this item and I was like, okay, we're going to try this one out. Are you ready to feel more energized, more focused, and supported? Go to lairdsuperfood.com and add nourishing plant-based foods to fuel you from sunrise to sunset. And you can use our promo code at checkout to save 15% off your purchase today. Our offer code for this for Laird is going to be True Crime XS. Pretty much everywhere except for Labarte Creations, if you use True Crime XS, that will get you, at Laird, it'll get you 15% off. At some of the other places, they'll get you 20% off. I'm going to tell you about 2 more sponsors today. So the first one is, the third one is Liquid IV. So let's talk about the real reasons that you need to hydrate. Late night TV binging, back-to-back Zoom meetings, going on a walk with your friends. Everyday hydration is not just for high-energy athletic endeavors. Liquid IV is the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. It's now available in sugar-free. This is years in the making, but Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free uses a proprietary zero-sugar hydration solution with no artificial sweeteners. It's got 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, but it's also got 8 vitamins and nutrients for everyday wellness. Liquid IV hydrates 2 times faster than water alone. Keep your daily routine exciting with 3 new flavors. They've got white peach, green grape, and lemon lime. I love all of these flavors, but I think that my favorite is probably the green grape. White peach I use as a secondary flavor, and lemon lime I leave here for my kids and my wife. Liquid IV believes that equitable access to clean and abundant water is the foundation of a healthier world. They also partner with leading organizations to fund and foster innovative solutions that help communities protect both their water and their futures. To date, Liquid IV has donated over 39 million servings in 50 plus countries around the world. You can get 20% off when you grab your Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier sugar-free or any other variant at liquidiv.com and use code TrueCrimeXS at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code TrueCrimeXS at liquidiv.com. And the last sponsor I want to tell you about is Zencastr. We are part of Zencastr's creative network. We've been using Zencastr since about midway into our first season. Meg and I experimented with a lot of different ways to put the podcast together. And the truth is, Zencastr was an integral ingredient to us being able to bring you this show. It's so easy. It's now super easy. You can record a podcast with Zencaster. You can log in using your browser and you start recording a high quality podcast right away. You can record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guest. You get to feel a sense of zen, knowing that Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you will always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. You sound your best. I mean, if you've ever worried about what you sound like, Zencaster's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recordings. It removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. You can set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with a click of a button. That's how you don't hear my dogs every second of every episode. Zencaster is all in one. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are now over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place, and you can distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Just go to Zencaster.com/pricing and use my code TrueCrimeXS, and you're going to get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. You can also check out the other plans they have available. I want you to have the same easy experiences that I do for all my podcasting and content needs. So Zencaster.com/pricing. The offer code is TrueCrimeXS, and it's time for you to share your story today. We are also adding New Era as a sponsor for the show. New Era Cap is a headwear and apparel brand founded in 1920 in Buffalo, New York. Now, I actually have some experience with New Era caps. My dad and I have been through multiple iterations of baseball caps through the years. We collect different styles, different eras, and now my teenager has started his own cap collection and has several New Eras as the centerpieces. Our favorite teams may not be the same, but our outfits are all topped with the same New Era ball caps. We love the quality and the ability to wear what the players are wearing. Not to mention, New Era is the leading headwear manufacturer with quality licensed products. You can support your favorite college or pro team in style from the official headwear provider for the MLB, NFL, and NBA. You can get a stylish accessory for your everyday ensemble and support True Crime XS. Just shop the official headwear and get 15% off when you go to neweracap.com. That's neweracap.com/truecrimexs. You can also use the code TrueCrimeXS at checkout. That's it. That's all you have to do. And that's 15% off your order using the promo code TrueCrimeXS.